Think about the last time you heard someone speak, really speak. Maybe it was a political leader, a professor, or even just a stranger at a party whose words demanded attention. Something about their voice, their rhythm, their choice of words made them stand out. Now, think about the opposite experience. Someone who, despite having something important to say, struggled to hold your interest. Maybe they hesitated too much, spoke too softly, or used phrases that made them seem unsure of themselves. The difference between these two speakers goes beyond mere content. It's about how they talk. We like to think that communication is just about the words we choose, that as long as we are clear and precise, people will understand us. But the truth is, language is far more than a tool for information exchange. The way you speak influences not only how others perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. Your speech patterns, tone, accent, and even the pace at which you talk shape everything, from how confident you feel in a conversation to the level of authority and credibility people assign to you. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself why you talk the way you do? Why do you use certain phrases more than others? Why does your voice change in certain situations? Why does your tone shift when speaking to different people? You might think that the way you speak is simply your voice, something entirely natural and personal. But in reality, it is a product of years of conditioning, shaped by social expectations, cultural background, and even unconscious psychological patterns. The way you speak did not develop in isolation. It was molded by the environment you grew up in, the people you listened to, the books you read, the media you consumed. From childhood, we learn to adjust our speech based on what is rewarded and what is ignored. We pick up accents from those around us, adopt slang and jargon from our peers, and fine-tune our tone based on how people react to us. In many ways, language is a mirror of our experiences. It reveals where we come from, who we associate with, and what we value. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Language is not just shaped by external forces. It also shapes our internal world. The way you speak doesn't just reflect your thoughts, it actively influences them. Studies in cognitive science suggest that different languages and speech patterns can alter the way we process information. For example, some languages emphasize action and directness, while others favor subtlety and implication. The way we structure our sentences, the words we choose, even the rhythm of our speech, it all feeds back into our thinking patterns. This means that your way of speaking isn't just about communication. It's about identity. Your voice, your phrasing, your linguistic habits all contribute to how you see yourself. When you speak with certainty, you start to feel more certain. When you use hesitant language, you reinforce self-doubt. The feedback loop between speech and self-perception is so powerful that people who consciously adjust their speech to be more confident often report feeling a genuine increase in self-esteem over time. But there's another side to this. Speech is also a marker of social belonging. We often don't realize it, but the way we talk signals which groups we identify with. Different professions have their own specialized jargon. Different regions have distinct dialects. Different generations use different slang. These linguistic markers can instantly place us within a certain community or set us apart. In many ways, how you speak determines not just how people see you, but whether they see you as one of them. And this has real consequences. Certain speech patterns are associated with intelligence and authority, while others are unfairly dismissed as uneducated or unrefined. A well-articulated thought in a polished accent is often given more credibility than the same thought spoken in a working-class dialect. This is why many people, consciously or unconsciously, modify their speech when they enter certain spaces. A person who speaks one way at home may speak another way at work. Someone who naturally speaks with an accent might tone it down in professional settings. These shifts in speech are not random. They reflect deep-seated social pressures about what kind of language is acceptable and what kind is not. This raises an important question. How much of the way you speak is truly you, and how much of it is a performance shaped by external expectations? We all adjust our language to fit different situations, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. But at what point does this adjustment stop being natural and start feeling like a mask? If speech is an expression of identity, what does it mean when we feel pressured to change the way we talk just to be taken seriously? Every time you open your mouth to speak, you are revealing something about yourself, whether you intend to or not. The words you choose, the rhythm of your sentences, the confidence or hesitation in your tone, all of these factors shape how others perceive you. But perception is not a neutral thing. Some ways of speaking command attention and respect, while others are dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored. Why does this happen? And more importantly, how does it affect your life? Think about how people react differently to the same idea depending on how it is delivered. A confident, articulate speaker can make even a simple observation sound profound, while a hesitant, uncertain speaker might struggle to be taken seriously, even if they have something truly insightful to say. This is because speech is not just about content, it is also about status. Language has always been a form of social currency. The way we speak signals not just who we are, but where we belong in the social hierarchy. In every society, certain accents, dialects, and speech patterns are associated with power and prestige, while others are considered less refined or even inferior. This is why someone with a polished, upper-class accent is often assumed to be more intelligent or educated than someone with a strong regional dialect, even if both people have the same level of knowledge. It's why people instinctively trust a voice that sounds calm and authoritative over one that sounds nervous or unsure. Sociolinguists have studied this phenomenon extensively, showing that people unconsciously rank different speech styles in terms of credibility, intelligence, and competence. In professional settings, for example, speaking with confidence and clarity is often more important than the actual content of what is being said. Research has found that people who use filler words, like you, no, or rising intonation at the end of their sentences, making statements sound like questions, are often perceived as less competent, even when their ideas are solid. This doesn't mean that the way you speak determines your intelligence. It simply means that society has preconditioned us to associate certain speech styles with authority and others with uncertainty. This is why many people instinctively adjust their way of speaking based on the situation they're in. A person might speak one way with close friends, another way in a job interview, and yet another way when addressing a crowd. These shifts in language are often subtle, but they reveal a deep truth. We all instinctively understand that speech is a form of power. But this raises a difficult question. What happens when the way you naturally speak does not align with what society expects? Many people experience this dilemma without even realizing it. A person with a strong regional accent might feel the need to soften it when speaking in professional settings to avoid being judged. Someone from a working-class background might feel pressure to use more sophisticated vocabulary to be taken seriously in elite circles. Even small things, like adjusting your tone, speaking more slowly, or choosing different words, are ways we modify our speech to fit in. This is not always a conscious decision. In fact, most of us adapt our speech patterns automatically. Psychologists call this linguistic accommodation, the tendency to subtly mirror the speech styles of those around us. This is why, when talking to someone with a different accent, you might find yourself unintentionally adjusting your pronunciation. Or why, in formal settings, you instinctively avoid slang. Our brains are wired to seek social acceptance, and speech is one of the most powerful ways we do this. But here's where it gets complicated. At what point does adapting your speech stop being natural and start feeling like a performance? When does the pressure to speak properly become a form of self-censorship? Many people, especially those from marginalized communities, experience this as a form of linguistic discrimination. They are made to feel that their natural way of speaking is wrong or uneducated, simply because it does not match the dominant standard. This is why the way we talk is so deeply tied to identity. Language is not just a tool for communication. It is a reflection of who we are, where we come from, and what we value. When someone is told to speak properly, what they are really being told is to conform to a certain linguistic standard, often one associated with social power. This can create an internal conflict. Do I speak in a way that feels natural, or do I change my speech to gain social approval? Imagine being in a conversation where you are constantly second-guessing yourself. You pause before speaking, carefully selecting each word, adjusting your tone, making sure you don't sound too informal, too regional, too emotional, too hesitant. This experience is more common than you think. The pressure to modify the way we speak is not just about communication. It affects how we see ourselves and how others see us in ways that go far deeper than we realize. The need to speak correctly often comes with a psychological cost. For many people, especially those who feel that their natural way of speaking is stigmatized, every conversation becomes a kind of performance. They must constantly monitor their speech, adjusting it to fit an expectation that was never created with them in mind. This creates a subtle but powerful sense of alienation, a feeling that your authentic voice is not enough. This phenomenon is particularly evident in professional and academic settings, where the way you speak can directly impact how you are perceived. Studies have shown that people with strong regional or working-class accents often feel pressure to neutralize their speech in job interviews, meetings, and public speaking situations. Some succeed in this adaptation, but at a cost: the feeling of losing something essential about themselves in the process. Linguists and psychologists refer to this as linguistic insecurity, the fear that the way you speak will make others judge you as less intelligent, less competent, or less worthy of respect. This insecurity is not distributed equally. It tends to affect people whose accents, dialects, or speech patterns have historically been marginalized. If you have ever hesitated before speaking because you worried about how your words would be received, you have experienced a version of this. The consequences of linguistic insecurity are profound. It can lead people to withdraw from conversations, speak less frequently in public, or even develop imposter syndrome, the feeling that they do not truly belong in the spaces they find themselves in. If the way you naturally speak is constantly being corrected, dismissed, or ridiculed, you start to internalize the idea that there is something inherently wrong with it. But here's the paradox. Even those who successfully modify their speech to fit in often feel inauthentic. Changing your voice might bring social benefits, but it can also create a disconnect between how you present yourself and who you really are. This is why some people, after years of adjusting their speech to fit a certain mold, find themselves longing to return to their natural way of speaking. They realize that their speech is not just a tool for social mobility. It is a part of their identity. This is especially relevant in multilingual communities, where people often switch between languages or dialects depending on the context. Known as code switching, this ability can be a powerful skill, allowing people to navigate different social spaces with ease. But it can also be exhausting, especially when the switch is not voluntary but forced by societal expectations. Many bilingual speakers report feeling that they have a public voice and a private voice, each tied to different aspects of their personality. Jean-Paul Sartre, in his analysis of human freedom, argued that much of our anxiety comes from the conflict between our true self and the roles society forces us to play. The way we speak is one of the most direct ways we experience this conflict. Are we speaking as ourselves, or are we speaking as the version of ourselves that will be most accepted? The more we suppress our natural voice, the more we risk losing touch with who we really are. But does this mean we should reject all social expectations and speak however we want, regardless of context? Not necessarily. Language is, after all, a social contract. We adjust our speech not just to fit in, but to ensure we are understood. The key question is, are you modifying your speech out of necessity or out of fear? Are you adapting to communicate more effectively, or are you suppressing your true voice to meet an arbitrary standard? If language is a social contract, then why does it so often feel like a battlefield? Why does the way we speak determine so much about how we are perceived, what spaces we are allowed into, and even how we see ourselves? The truth is, for many, speech has become less about expression and more about conformity. But what if it didn't have to be that way? Imagine for a moment what it would be like to speak without hesitation, to say exactly what you mean in exactly the way that feels most natural to you, without fear of judgment, correction, or exclusion. This is not just about words, it's about authenticity. And in a world that constantly pressures us to adjust, dilute, or disguise the way we communicate, reclaiming our voice is a radical act. But how do we do that? How do we untangle our authentic speech from the layers of self-censorship and social conditioning we've accumulated over the years? The first step is awareness. Most of us are not fully conscious of how much we modify our speech in different contexts. We instinctively shift our tone, vocabulary, and even accent based on who we are speaking to. This ability, known as linguistic adaptability, is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it is a powerful skill. The problem arises when this adaptability is no longer a choice, but a compulsion born out of fear. When we no longer feel we have permission to speak as ourselves, we have lost something vital. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that our anxiety often stems from living in bad faith, the act of denying our true selves in order to meet external expectations. When applied to language, bad faith means speaking in a way that is not really our own simply because we believe we must. If we want to reclaim our voice, we have to confront this habit of self-denial. One of the most powerful ways to do this is by noticing when we self-edit. Pay attention to the moments when you hold back from saying something in the way you naturally would. What words do you avoid? What tones do you suppress? Who are you most conscious of adjusting your speech for? The answers to these questions will reveal just how much of your communication is shaped by external pressures rather than internal truth. But awareness is only the beginning. The real challenge is unlearning the fear of speaking freely, and this requires something uncomfortable: experimentation. Start small. Try allowing your natural speech patterns to emerge in situations where you would normally adjust. Maybe it's in a casual conversation where you usually filter yourself. Maybe it's in a workplace setting where you tend to hold back. Notice what happens. Do people react differently? Do you feel different? Often, we assume the worst, that our authentic voice will be rejected, but more often than not, we find that speaking freely strengthens rather than weakens our relationships. Of course, this does not mean disregarding all social context. Language is, after all, a tool of connection, and some level of adaptation is necessary. But the difference is in intention. When you adjust the way you speak, are you doing it because it helps you communicate better, or because you fear you won't be accepted otherwise? The former is practical, the latter is self-erasure. But what about the deeper psychological scars left by years of being told that the way you speak is wrong? For many, especially those whose speech patterns have been stigmatized, the act of reclaiming their voice is not just about speaking differently. It is about healing. Linguistic trauma is real. If you grew up being mocked for your accent, being corrected for your grammar, or being told your way of speaking was uneducated, those experiences do not disappear easily. They become embedded in your sense of self, shaping the way you interact with the world. Overcoming this means not only changing how you speak, but changing how you think about your own voice. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." If your way of speaking has been suppressed, then your world has, in some way, been made smaller. But reclaiming your voice expands that world again. It restores what was taken. This is why, in recent years, there has been a growing movement toward linguistic reclamation. People are pushing back against the idea that there is only one correct way to speak. They are embracing their regional dialects, their natural accents, their cultural linguistic roots, and in doing so, they are redefining what it means to speak well. If language is more than just a means of communication, if it is, in fact, a tool of power, then who decides which voices are valued and which are dismissed? Who determines what is proper speech and what is not? And perhaps most importantly, how do these rules shape our ability to be taken seriously, to be respected, or even to exist fully as ourselves? Throughout history, language has been used to reinforce hierarchies. Certain ways of speaking are elevated, while others are labeled as inferior, uneducated, or even unintelligent. This is not a coincidence. Philosopher Michel Foucault argued that power is not just about laws and institutions, it is about who gets to define reality. Language plays a central role in this. Those who control language, who dictate its norms, enforce its standards, and decide which forms are acceptable, hold an invisible but immense power over society. Consider how accents, dialects, and linguistic styles are judged in everyday life. A person with a polished upper-class accent may be assumed to be competent and authoritative, while someone with a working class or regional dialect might be unfairly dismissed as less educated or credible. The same principle applies across cultures. Certain languages are treated as sophisticated and international, while others are viewed as provincial or less valuable. Even within a single language, variations in pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar are used to rank people socially. This is why reclaiming your voice is not just an individual act, it is a form of resistance. Speaking in a way that feels true to you, whether it aligns with social norms or not, challenges the idea that power should be determined by linguistic conformity. And for those whose speech has been marginalized, taking ownership of language is a profound statement. I exist, I am valid, and I do not need to change to be worthy of being heard. But this battle is not just external, it is also deeply internalized. Many people, even without realizing it, have adopted the belief that their natural way of speaking is somehow inadequate. This is not accidental, it is the result of years of conditioning. From childhood, we are corrected, judged, and molded to fit into linguistic standards that often have more to do with social status than with clarity or communication. Think about it. How many times have you hesitated before speaking, worried that you might sound wrong? How often have you adjusted your speech, not to express yourself more clearly, but to sound more impressive, more intelligent, or more socially acceptable? This fear is not just about language, it is about power dynamics. It is about who we believe has the right to speak freely and who must constantly prove themselves. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings struggle with authenticity because we are constantly performing for others. We shape our actions and our words not based on our own truth, but based on how we want to be perceived. This creates a deep existential anxiety because we begin to lose sight of where the performance ends and where the real self begins. So what happens when we stop performing? What happens when we speak as we truly are, without fear or self-polluting? The answer is both liberating and terrifying. To reclaim your voice means to accept that some people will not like it, some will judge, some will resist, and yet, this is precisely why it matters. Every time someone speaks in a way that defies linguistic norms, they chip away at the idea that there is only one way to be intelligent, articulate, or worthy of attention. There is immense power in owning your speech, not just in casual conversation, but in professional and public spaces where linguistic conformity is expected. The more people speak as they naturally do, the harder it becomes for outdated linguistic hierarchies to maintain their hold. This is how language evolves. This is how the walls of exclusion are slowly dismantled. If language is a tool of power, then learning to wield it on your own terms is one of the most radical acts of self-liberation. The way you speak is not just about communication. It is about identity, perception, and control. It determines how you are heard, how you are judged, and even how you judge yourself. But what does it mean to truly speak with power? Does it mean perfecting the most polished, refined way of speaking, or does it mean something deeper, something more personal and transformative? For many, the idea of reclaiming their voice is tied to the fear of rejection. We have been conditioned to believe that if we do not speak in the right way, we will not be respected, taken seriously, or given opportunities. This is not an irrational fear. History has shown us that entire groups have been silenced, excluded, and diminished simply because of the way they speak. But what is often overlooked is that the true power of language comes not from conformity, but from authenticity. To speak with power does not mean sounding like someone else. It means speaking in a way that is undeniably yours, fully inhabited, unapologetic, and intentional. This does not mean ignoring context. Different situations require different approaches. A poet will not use the same tone in a business meeting as they would in their art. A comedian will not speak the same way on stage as they would in a courtroom. But the key is this: adaptation is not the same as erasure. Adjusting your tone, vocabulary, or rhythm should be a choice, not a forced submission to someone else's idea of what is correct. This is where many struggle. The fear of being dismissed, mocked, or misunderstood keeps people trapped in a linguistic prison, constantly second-guessing themselves. The solution is not to rebel for the sake of rebellion, but to cultivate awareness. to consciously decide when to shift your voice and when to let it stand exactly as it is. Philosopher Audre Lorde famously said, "Your silence will not protect you." Staying quiet, toning yourself down, or molding your speech to fit into rigid expectations does not guarantee safety. It only ensures that you remain unheard. The truth is, no matter how carefully you shape your words, there will always be people who judge. There will always be those who dismiss your voice, no matter how perfect it sounds. The question is, will you let them control you? Reclaiming your voice requires unlearning the shame that has been attached to your natural way of speaking. It requires recognizing that intelligence is not confined to a single dialect, that confidence is not determined by accent, and that authenticity is always more powerful than performance. It means making peace with the fact that not everyone will approve, and knowing that their approval is not necessary. There is a reason why history remembers those who spoke in their own way. The most influential thinkers, writers, and leaders did not shape the world by imitating those before them. They were bold enough to speak differently, to challenge the norms of their time, to introduce new ways of thinking, to refuse the demand for linguistic conformity. Think about how language itself evolves. The words and phrases that are seen as unprofessional or incorrect today often become the standard in the future. What is ridiculed in one generation becomes the foundation for the next. This is why rigid ideas about how people should speak are not only outdated, they are unsustainable. So what does this mean for you? It means recognizing that your voice is not something to be corrected, it is something to be claimed. It means deciding right now to stop apologizing for the way you naturally express yourself. It means understanding that the real measure of linguistic power is not about sounding like everyone else, but about sounding like yourself with absolute conviction. When you embrace your voice, you stop shrinking in conversations. You stop hesitating before speaking. You stop filtering your words out of fear of being perceived the wrong way. Instead, you begin to trust that your voice, exactly as it is, carries value. This is what speaking with power truly means. It is not about controlling how others hear you. It is about deciding that you will be heard, whether they like it or not. The way you speak reveals more than you realize. It tells the story of where you come from, what you value, and who you are. And perhaps most importantly, it shows whether you have the courage to stand by that story, or whether you are still trying to fit into someone else's. So the final question is this: will you let others dictate your voice, or will you take it back? Because once you do, once you own the way you speak with full confidence, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to sound powerful. You simply are.